Welcome to the McFeely Mess Podcast at Inforum.com. In-depth conversations and opinion covering a variety of topics from the world of news, sports, and more. Here's Mike McFeely.
All right, welcome to another edition of the McFeely Mess Podcast at Inforum.com. And I am pleased on this edition to talk with somebody who I actually consider sort of a newspaper hero to me, because in a different life, Ron Schara was a very talented, outstanding outdoors reporter and columnist for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune newspaper, after which he became probably what most of you folks know him as, which was the longtime host of Minnesota Bound, a outstanding, multiple award-winning, multiple Emmy-winning television program in which Ron isn't fully involved anymore, but he's got his fingers in it still, and he has a successful production company that produces, I think 7-8 outdoors programs that you all watch, probably on your local regional FanDuel network or wherever you watch your shows on, or on your iPads or whatever. But we're having Ron on the pod today to talk about an angler summit that an organization he's involved with is hosting on Friday, April, 17th, down in Alexandria, Minnesota, my hometown. And I want to welcome in Ron Schara to the McFeely Mess Podcast. Hello, sir. How are you?
Well, thanks, Mike. Gosh, you make me sound like I'm a legend in my own mind now.
well, I'll tell you this. As my dad worked at the Star-Tribune as a back shop guy, as a union printer. And so we actually grew up in Crystal, Minnesota, which is a suburb of Minneapolis. And he, of course, then brought home the newspaper every day. And so I read it. And even as a young guy, I believe you started at the Strib, it was probably the Tribune or the Star back then. But I think you started there probably in the late 60s or so. And so I grew up reading your outdoorsy stuff. And we had a cabin at that time up on Lake Carlos near Alexandria, Minnesota. And so I got into the whole fishing and pheasant hunting and duck hunting thing. And I just really enjoyed reading what you wrote back in those days, just extremely talented and extremely entertaining. And so as I chose a career path, I would say that you were one of the people who I read as a young guy that kind of helped push me down the path to get into newspaper writing and get a journalism degree and end up spending, good Lord, I'm on my 40th year or whatever now in newspapers, but you were one of those guys. So I appreciated your work then, and I'm excited to talk with you today.
Well, I didn't even know I was doing all that for you. But I had your path in life takes different paths. And sometimes you don't know if you turn right or left where it's going to go. I had that same experience, and I was going to be a game warden, early on, because I was the best squirrel hunter in Elmwood County, Iowa. The title I gave myself, and so I was a pretty good trout fisherman. But I guess my point is, just like you don't know where life leads once in a while, but in your case, in my case, it led to a pretty good ending there. You're sitting in a fishing boat.
Absolutely, for sure. The reason that we're having you on the podcast today, Ron, as you know, is on Friday down in Alexandria at Arrowwood Resort on the beautiful shores of Lake Darling. You're going to be hosting an angler summit, and you are the president of an organization called MinFish, capital M, capital N hyphen fish. And before we get into what the summit is going to be, and it's really a star-studded cast, what is MinFish? What is this organization of which you are the president?
Good question, Mike. MinFish was formed in 2018 by a bunch of us that came to the realization that when it comes to fishing, a great sport in Minnesota, a hugely popular sport in Minnesota, was getting no attention and no love from the legislature. About the only thing our legal lawmakers ever thought of regarding fishing was, should they raise your fishing license? And so we formed to see what we could do about it. There were issues about what the heck was going on with Mille Lacs. I mean, here's a great world-class walleye fishing lake that the season is closed and stuff like that. So anyway, we formed, and it's interesting to say, and I'll say this Friday when I open up the event, we didn't form to be a DNR kicker or bitch and moan about what DNR was doing or not doing. We decided to take a different approach. We reserved the right to question and ask, but we're mostly there to what can we do to help. And I mean, fishing is pretty good in Minnesota, but it could be better. There are some issues out there, and you'll hear about some of those at the summit. So we formed under that sense. And we also realized, Mike, that the game in our legislators, and it's probably true of North Dakota too, if the squeaky wheel gets the grease, they always say, well, we fishermen, we'd rather sit in a boat and have a beer or talk about how to use a different jig to catch a walleye and not pay any attention to what's going on in the legislature. And so we intended to change that. We hired a lobbyist firm, spent $40,000 a year to lobby legislators. And that's the game you got to play. So these are things we learned. There's a lot more we learned. I can go on for a long time about that. But that's the essence of MinFish. We address problems because of our relationship with DNR. We're able to get them into meetings. For example, with Minnesota bait fishermen, they didn't talk to each other, Mike. They said, Jesus, you go, what? You didn't talk to each other. Well, we're going to get you together to talk. And, we ran out of spot-tail shiners a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
How could you do that? Well, it was because they weren't talking to each other. Well, so we helped solve that. And I could go on to some of our other things we brag about, fixing up our fish hatcheries, fixing up our public boat accesses. We did that getting money out of the legislature, which was totally ignoring us until then. And so anyway, that's kind of what MinFish is about. We raise a little hell if we need to, but we're mostly there to see what we can do to make fishing better in Minnesota.
I find the approach to the DNR interesting as a lifelong Minnesota resident, even though I work for a company based in North Dakota. The kicking around of the DNR is something that I, as a columnist, have railed against over the years because I believe that so much of that is unproductive. And honestly, a lot of it, in my view anyway, is uninformed. That if there's a problem with something, from what I've seen in Minnesota, from many sportsmen's groups, whether it's deer hunting, whether it's duck hunting, whether it's angling, the DNR is always the villain. Always. Always. It doesn't matter if they are, they aren't, they always are. And that's, to me, has never made much sense because in some cases, yes, they are. Yes, there's no doubt about it. But in many other cases, I think that there's science and there's data that shows certain things about fishing and about the state of some of our fisheries that the DNR is not necessarily the villain and that people just don't want to hear what the DNR has to say because they don't like the answer. And I'm thinking specifically of a lake out in Otter Tail County named Pelican Lake, which is, it's doesn't matter necessarily, but it does, that it's a high-end place where many of the well-to-do in Fargo, Moorhead have their lake places. And every time something goes wrong, it's the DNR's fault, and then it's a whole to-do. And so I appreciate, I guess what I'm saying in a lot of words, that your organization is not necessarily there to boot the DNR in the ass every chance you get, but at least to have conversations or be liaisons. But then if they do need a boot in the ass, that you're not afraid to do that as well.
Yeah, that sums it up. But I agree with you. We're very fond of belittling DNR. Then we go back to our beer and our looking at walleye jigs. When I talk to some fishing groups, I say to them, We have the only metropolitan fish hatchery in Minnesota on Warner Road in St. Paul. It is 125 years old, held together with duct tape. It's too dangerous for school kids to go see how walleyes rear, to see the baby walleye swimming around, blah, 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 blah. Why do you think that is? How could we end up in a state like Minnesota with a $6 billion fishing economy have a hatchery that's 125 years old? I asked that question, Mike, of the group, and then I answer it. Look in the mirror, because we haven't even asked anybody like in the legislature to fix it. We haven't asked the legislature to build a new hatchery or replace it or do something, because we don't pay attention. And the squeaky wheel gets the grease, that's an old lesson, and it's true. So that's another thing that MinFish did. Now, as a result, it took us 2 years, and I'll back up and say sometimes working with DNR gets very frustrating because government works real slow. Mm-hmm. And then there are things going on you don't know. For example, 2 years ago, we have friendly legislators who put in a bill for $3 million bonding bill. This is borrowing. So $3 million bonding bill to start looking at what to do with that hatchery, that St. Paul hatchery, engineering study, for lack of a better word. And we asked DNR to get on board. Well, they wouldn't. What? I sent a note to the DNR commissioner, Sarah, who I think is a good person. I said, well, so I guess all I can figure out, Sarah, is that you enjoy having 125-year-old hatcheries. Well, she fired back, but that's okay. And but now this year they're on board. So what happened, you say to yourself? Well, here's what goes on behind the scenes, I think. I'm just guessing now, but the governor's sitting there, his staff's telling DNR, all right, what are your bonding requests? You can only have so much. That's it. Don't ask for anything more. Well, then, they have their own ideas what they want for bonding. And we come along to tell DNR, hey, would you add $3 million onto your bonding? Well, no, our requests are already full. I mean, so that stuff happens. And so this year it was different. So DNR is on board. So that's when I mean government works slow and sometimes irritating because, well, that's government. So, but you get a lot further along by working as a partner and not just as a critic.
So at the Anglers Summit on Friday, I'm going to read off the list of luminaries and dignitaries beside yourself. Sarah Stroman, the DNR commissioner who you fired off the note to, she will be there. Al Lindner, who most anglers in Minnesota know, of course, as the celebrity angler, the TV angler. The DNR's Patrick Schmaltz and Brad Parsons will be talking about panfish, which is really the reason why I went down there, which is why I signed up for the thing, because I want to hear what DNR is going to do about my beloved crappies, which are getting an onslaught from anglers year-round now because of forward-facing sonar, but that's a whole different topic we can get into. Speaking of your bait guy, Marshall Kep of the famed Kep family is going to talk about bait in Minnesota. We're going to talk about some hooking mortality, catch and release. My buddy Jason Mitchell from Devil's Lake is going to be there to talk about the changes that he's seen in fishing. And Gary Leaf, one of your colleagues from MinFish, is also going to be giving an update, as well as a discussion about invasive species, which, of course, is a major deal in Minnesota the last, 25 years, probably, if you're talking about zebra mussels, and longer than that if you're talking about some of the plant invasive species. So it's going to be a full day. Is there any part of it that you're looking forward to the most, or what you want to hear from people? Because I've sort of given away my ghost here that I'm a little concerned about the crappies in the lakes in Minnesota. How about yourself, Ron?
Well, I look forward to it all, but here's what's interesting. Unlike some DNR roundtables in the past, there will be plenty of time for the audience at our summit to raise their hand, ask questions, spout off their own opinions, etc., because this is a discussion. And this is a chance for you. You're going to have the Minnesota DNR fishery chief there, and he's going to be up front, and you can raise your hand, and I'm going to come running there with a microphone, and you're going to ask a question. And this is how we do it. So it's if you don't get some of your own questions answered, it's your own damn fault, because people are there, and it's a very informal thing. So at lunch, you can go up and talk to them, whatever. One thing I'm going to be interested in is Gary Leaf is going to mention, I hope it won't get too scientific, but this is some new revelations coming out about what zebra mussels are doing to some of our lakes. And that is they're depleting the phytoplankton because they feed on it. And so do baby walleyes as they come out of the egg. And there's been some studies made in Minnesota on Leech Lake and others showing drastic declines in this plankton. And then you read reports from DNR about what they're finding about survival of young walleyes, and by God, that survival rate is way down. And then you say, is this plankton issue doing that? Well, research says it could be very seriously. So you go, holy buckets. Another issue that there be any stuff like that.
Yeah, it's let me ask you this. Okay. So is there good news in Minnesota fishing? Because every time I turn around, it's, the walleyes are struggling on Lake Mille Lacs, and their zebra mussels are spreading pretty much unabated. The fishing is still great in many of the lakes in which I fish, despite my shortcomings as an angler, especially panfish, quite frankly. I personally have not seen in some of the zebra mussel infested lakes some issues there, but the last 30 years, it seems, it's just been a cascade of things just challenging the fishing landscape in Minnesota. Is there good news? Are we still in good shape, or am I just the sky is falling guy, or is that which is my nature, by the way, just of who I am. So it doesn't surprise me, but it just seems like, man, every day I wake up and there's something else going on.
Well, there's some truth to that, and I'm kind of with you. I mean, you zebra mussels, invasive aquatic plants, and all the use of chemicals that's going on that can be good or bad, and this or that. Forward-facing sonar is going to annihilate all of our game fish. You hear all that stuff. Barotrauma is going to eradicate the crappies, and there's some truth a little bit to all of that. But you know what I find optimistic, Mike, is that anglers are starting to pay more attention to what's going on, and the public concern will raise a lot of these issues, and there will be solutions. I don't know about zebra mussels, but I can tell you I'm on the board of the University of Minnesota Invasive Research Center, and they're doing some highfalutin work that I can't even understand about ideas to control zebra mussels with some kind of hormonal things that you and I we couldn't even write a sentence about. But so that stuff is happening. There's no quick answers yet. There may never be, but people are working at it. So I find that encouraging. there's efforts to, take a look. You want something encouraging, take a look at the high school and college fishing teams now.
Yes. Yep.
And to mention that high school trap shooting teams, getting young people interested in the outdoors that way. So not all is doomsday. My dad thought when he heard Elvis Presley that was the end of the world. He thought we were going to hell. So,
well, and when you mention that, not Elvis Presley, when you mention some of the changes we've seen, I agree with you. In terms of, especially I think, in terms of anglers themselves, and that includes me, and lakeshore owners and cabin owners or homeowners. Now there's not so many cabins on a lot of lakes anymore as there are, frankly, suburban homes. But there certainly has been a change in, I think, ethics and the understanding that some of our fish species have to be protected. And I think if you just look back a few years to when the DNR was pushing through the bluegill initiative or the sunfish initiative, the DNR guys I was talking to were saying, 10, 15 years ago, we could have never done this, where we're limiting the daily limit to 5 bluegills and sunfish on some of these lakes, because the people who own cabins or own houses on these lakes would have never gone for it. They're like, what the hell? How am I ever going to have a meal of fish if I can only take 5 bluegills home? But they said people have realized that on certain lakes that have the biological necessities to do so, if you limit people to keeping 5 bluegills a day with a 10 fish possession limit, you get better fish. Yeah, it's more fun to catch bigger fish than like a gajillion 6-inch bluegills.
Exactly.
And so people, I think, are catching on that, maybe 5 crappies that are 11 inches long is plenty of meat instead of 10 crappies that are 8 inches long. And I think that's catching on with more and more anglers. And that is a positive. You're right. There are some optimistic things to look at.
And to follow up, if you'd have told me 10, 15, 20 years ago that Minnesotans would be happy to release a walleye, I'd have said, you're fooling yourself.
Yep.
But true today, a lot of walleye anglers, they just catch them and let them go.
Yep.
Still like to eat a walleye, but I let them go myself if they're 20 inches or more.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yeah. And again, I'm the same way, and I'm a terrible walleye angler. And honestly, I catch most of my walleyes by accident fishing crappies with the jig. But in my boat, the rule is if you catch a walleye over 20 inches, it goes back in the water. And if that leads to anger or tears, then it leads to anger or tears. But I think it's the right thing to do. And I think people realize that. And I'm one of those people who's changed his way of thinking in the last 40, 50 years, like many others have.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to something we mentioned earlier, Mike, if I may, about the things like Minfish has learned. We learned about our hatcheries being out of shape, and we learned about our public boat accesses. We learned about the bait issue. Another thing we learned that still hasn't been corrected, and I'm shocked. I tell angling groups, if you think all of your lakes around Alexandria are being intensely managed by the DNR lake managers, you're fooling yourself, because they're not. DNR Fisheries is working with a smaller budget and fewer people than it had 10 years ago. And they are not doing the creel surveys that tell them how well you're doing in the XYZ lake. They're doing 2 of those per region a year because they can't afford to do any more. They're taking most of their budget money is being spent on the top 5 or 10 walleye lakes in Minnesota. That would be Lake of the Woods, Rainy, Mille Lacs, Upper Red, Leech.
Leech, yep.
That's where most of their fish management budget is going, because those are important, very important walleye lakes. And so one day, a DNR bigwig, wasn't Sarah, was standing up and spouting off that 93 to 94% of all the walleyes caught in Minnesota are not coming from stocking, they're coming from natural lakes. And I raised my hand, I said, I'm sorry, but you don't know that because you haven't had the staff to measure in all of these lakes from western and southern Minnesota that are stocked, how walleye fishermen are doing there, because you haven't surveyed them.
Right.
So, but that's, and you say, well, whose fault is that? How come DNR didn't ask? How come DNR didn't ask for more money? How come DNR didn't ask to fix that St. Paul fish hatchery up? I tell you why. Because in the legislature, when a state agency walks into a committee hearing and says, we need more money, the legislators laugh and say, well, get in line. You're just like all the rest of the agency. I mean,
yeah.
True. Yeah. So DNR has bitched about that St. Paul fish hatchery, and it fell on deaf ears. And they have asked for more money, and it fell on deaf ears. And in the meantime, so I mean, I get me going and going here, but again, it's simply because we, the public anglers, have not been paying attention. And that's probably the most critical role that MinFish is playing right now.
225 people have signed up to go to the summit on Friday. That's a full house. They're taking no more registrations. I regret to inform our listening audience, but I will be there. I was going to go there just as a citizen and a taxpayer of Minnesota. I'm now going to go there as an employee of Forum Communications Company and report back to all the readers and listeners of the Forum newspaper and our multiple properties across Minnesota. So a leisure day for me has turned into a work day, but it's going to be, I think it'll be good. It's going to be fascinating for me to be able to listen to what people have to say. And clearly with 225 people signed up, there's many others are concerned about and curious about the fisheries in Minnesota. So Ron, thank you very much for coming on today. Didn't expect this to happen. We made it happen, and I very much look forward to meet. I don't think we've ever met. First time we've talked, I think, on the phone was today. So I look forward to meeting you on Friday down in Alexandria.
Well, I'll be, I'm a good-looking guy there. Swab.
It'll be like looking in the mirror for you then. A couple of tall, good-looking guys. Yep.
Hey, by the way, you might tell your listeners, I guess we can, hopefully the summit will be streamed.
Oh, okay. All right.
So they can find, I don't know how they find out if it's streamed or not, but because I'm too dumb, but hopefully it will be.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep, you bet. Ron Schara joining us on the Mike McFeely Mess podcast. I'll be down in Alexandria, my old stomping grounds, on Friday. I'm not even sure if the ice is off down there yet. I have not been out of town here for so long that I don't know what's going on with some of the lakes. But we'll report back from there, and stay tuned and check us out at inforum.com. We'll talk again soon. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the McFeely Mess podcast at inforum.com. For more podcasts and columns, head to inforum.com and search Mike McFeely.